So, good morning, everyone. I'm going to try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. You do know these are interactive sessions we're doing on the main stage, aren't we? So you are going to be asked to be speaking. In fact, if in any of the Q&A from the many commercial and technological opportunities that will be created as the way we make, distribute and use energy undergoes radical change over the coming decades. Before joining the Catapult, Philip worked for BP for over 30 years in a range of commercial and general management positions, but mostly in customer-facing businesses operating in Asia, North and South America and Europe. Philip, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the energy session. We hope this is going to be full of energy. To start us off, what I'd like to do is invite our four panelists to the stage. These are the people who are going to bring their insights to bear and hopefully be the core of a really stimulating session. So to begin with, Gordon Waddington from the Energy Research Accelerator. Emma Pinchbeck from Renewable UK. Olivier Guérin from Engie. And Mark Futchian from Centrica. Welcome, everyone. So in a second or two, I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to give a couple of minutes of overview of their perspective on the energy challenge and the energy opportunity that we see coming before us. Just to set the scene a little bit, though, so we're all aware, as we saw from the lights going off earlier, energy underpins, and clean, secure, reliable energy will underpin every aspect of every country's economy and society, and so it's absolutely essential that we think through and understand how best to manage the transformation that the energy systems, not just here but everywhere, appear to be facing at the moment. We're moving from a world where energy was siloed, it was vertically integrated, it was largely top-down. The institutions, the business models, the rules, the policies were largely contained within those silos, and they very rarely touched each other. We're moving to a world where it's likely that we're going to see massive lateral integration across these various vectors of energy. And so significant potential disruption, but also significant potential opportunity in the way that technology forms and adapts, but also business models and regulation form and adapt. What's interesting, of course, about energy is that in many parts of the energy sector, the markets are highly managed, they're highly regulated. So one of the key questions must be, how do we manage innovation and change effectively in this highly regulated world, while keeping the lights on, while making sure that energy remains affordable, while meeting our green targets, and while also respecting the obligations that we have around social equity in the provision of energy for all. So a rich area of debate, and to kick us off, I'd like to ask Gordon to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Philip. There's so much you could say, and I've got 3 minutes to try and say something. So what I'm going to pick on is something that's closely related to the area that I work. I work in research. I work with a whole load of universities. But actually my background isn't that area. My background is in industry. And one of the comments that came from the sessions this morning from Ruth McKernan and Claire Perry was this critical partnership that needs to exist between industry and academia. I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we don't yet have all the technology answers, and we certainly don't have all of the human interaction factors that are necessary in order to meet our obligations relative to COP21. There are so many great things that have happened in this country, so many great technologies that have been started in this country and not necessarily exploited as well as we would like. And in many cases, it's because of the gap that has existed between the ideas and the implementation, the take-up of those ideas, and what's possible for small and medium-sized companies, those innovation gaps as you take it through the technology readiness levels. I think the critical thing, therefore, is how do we develop the partnership? How does industry go looking to the research sector in order to get the ideas to overcome their problems? And how does the research sector work closely by listening to industry on what their issues are to create the opportunities for UK industry?
Emma.
Again, 4 minutes to talk about something I really like. So we'll see how I do. I've added an extra minute on, and I've hoped that Philip won't notice. My favourite statistic, I have two favourite statistics from the past year I want to start with. The first was a World Economic Forum graph that annoyingly I have been unable to find re-Googling, but does exist, which is that they showed the most profitable companies in energy over the last 10 years, so 10 years ago, and then in 2017, so between 2007 and 2017. And 10 years ago, the most profitable, powerful companies in the power sector were all extractive companies and vertically integrated utilities. And they did a update of that graph, and there are more and more what we think of as ICT companies or services companies now in that list, and fewer vertically integrated utilities. And the ones that are there are changing their business models rapidly. And that was an amazing insight into the sort of change we're experiencing in the energy sector. And my second favourite statistic, and I have to say like this in my job, but it's the fact that in the recent auctions for offshore wind in the UK, we got a strike price of £57.50. And no one in our office sweepstake internally got even close to that figure, and we're supposed to be the experts. So it was completely remarkable. And this is part of a wider change that's being driven by the 3Ds that you've probably heard of. It's, you know, digitalization, decentralization of energy, decarbonisation to meet the Paris Agreement, but also democratization. So an idea that we need more public permissiveness to do what we want to do. And I just want to talk a little bit about the real issue here, which is not will there be change, actually, but how much change and how quickly and what sort of change are we talking about. So very quickly, 3 areas of change that are still up for grabs or where there's lots of nuance. The first is tech change. Those prices in the auction were largely achieved by bigger, better bits of kit. So the turbines we installed today are about 20 times more powerful than the ones that were being installed when I started my career. But it's also about improvements in operations and maintenance, and that has often included doing things with digital and what we think of as software. So a couple of my companies are working with the European Space Agency to get better data on weather further ahead that they can then use to plan their operations. That is part of the reason that they're saving costs. And Philip mentioned that this technology change is also going to drive a collapsing in the vectors between power, heat, and transport. So a lot of my job now is not about the obvious tech stuff, you know, the big bits of kit that everyone pictures in their heads, but actually integrating software and other sectors, and also working out what my technologies need to do in that world. So if we're going for electrification, what does that mean for us in the power sector? Can we meet the extra capacity we need for electric vehicles? Do we do electrolysis? And then that's changing the market and it's changing businesses. So there's big questions about who pays for all this change if we're doing grid reinforcement as smart grids and we have more decentralized stuff coming on. There's exciting things happening in blockchain that, frankly, I don't even understand, that's changing how we invest. And the businesses involved are also changing. And I'm going to finish on my plug, because I'm the millennial on the panel, to say that we think about energy businesses as being power sector companies, but as I say, they're changing, and 50% of my membership is made up of things like ex-fishing companies that are now helping install wind turbines. And the people in those businesses are changing. And you better believe that if you're under the age of 30, and particularly if you're a new graduate, you're much more likely to want to work in a renewables company than in another kind of energy business. And we need to get better at working out how those people will also drive the future of this industry. And I'm going to stop there because Phil's glaring at me. Okay.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for the invitation to come here. So, what are the consequences today of energy transition for a big company like ENGIE? We have 20,000 people in UK. It's the second country after France for our group, but we are present in 70 countries. So, like Emma said, we are now a 3D company. We are trying to make decarbonation, decentralization, and we are empowering digitalization in order to change our businesses. So, what is today for ENGIE energy transition is really a huge and amazing change. An amazing opportunity for the countries like Africa or Asia don't have plenty access of energy because with off-grid technologies, we can deliver energy and services to people that don't have an access to this kind of utilities in the past. But it's a huge change for this kind of company like ENGIE because we move from a very static sector for the last 20 or 60 years where we do some gas networks, electricity production with centralized power plants, to a decentralized world with plenty of different solutions, plenty of different needs. We are growing to be, and we are trying to be very close to the customer's need, because now the customer needs are changing. They want to control, they have a better view about where does the energy come from. Is it decarbonized? Is it green? Is it produced near their home in local situation? So it changed completely the relationship with the customers. And what is very hard for a large company is try to deliver this kind of solution everywhere. The last word was to duplicate one system with plenty perimeter and countries, and now is try to make a handmade solution for every customer. So, and sometimes it can be delivered to cities, can be delivered to people, it can be delivered to districts, for example. So when you go to Thailand or to France, to UK or to Brazil, you can have very different systems because some people need heat, some people need more electricity, some people have better expectation on mobility, so it's very complex. So we are now entering in a new and with new world, higher complexity. So it's a new era of innovation for technology, innovation for management, because we need more decentralized companies. So with plenty of different affiliates that can do the business everywhere. So it's a revolution for management because we need to have a better delegation for managers that are far from Paris, for example, for our company. And it's a new era of innovation for business model because we cannot no longer continue our common business model with production, transmission, and commercialization. Now you have disruptive technology with digital that can change everything. So we are trying to empower this. And in ENGIE, it's very concrete because we have a rotation of assets of before 2020, we need to sell 35 billion euro of assets, old assets, and invest in the new world. So in renewable, in digital, in new system, in new business models. So it's an amazing era for us. Some part is hard for people, and sometimes it's very opportunistic, very interesting, very motivating for the new generation. We are trying not to forget everyone in that, and trying to move forward. And really, ENGIE, with our new CEO, Isabelle Kocher, is completely empowering this new situation and this new opportunity.
Thank you, Olivier. And Mark.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and speaking on this really interesting subject. I think having listened to some of my co-panelists, there's a general consensus that we are on the cusp of some really significant and exciting change in energy. And you know, as a large international company like ENGIE, Centrica also has an element of threat from that, but also if we can adapt, a sense of opportunity. So By way of introduction, I look after our power generating assets for Centrica. And in the past, we've been a conventional utility, so owning nuclear, large offshore wind, and CCGTs. And we're going through a very significant change, similar to what Olivier was describing, moving out of our large central assets and embracing smart, flexible generation technology instead. So I thought I might comment on why such a radical change to our approach. It may be kind of picked up by some of the points Emma made, but I think there are three key trends that we anticipate and are looking towards. I think the first is falling technology costs. I think in particular it's solar, PV, wind and battery. The costs are falling fast. And to give an example of that, battery costs have fallen by half in the last 5 years, and looking forward could fall another half again. So it's a very rapidly falling and changing context. And that means that we are close to that utopia of subsidy-free renewables, and that could be a really key tipping point. So for me, that's absolutely one to watch. I think the second is digitalization, and a couple of the panelists have talked about that already, but it opens the door for democratization of energy. So the ability for all end users to participate in the energy system and be active in that rather than passive. And the third is decarbonization. So there's nothing new about decarbonization. It's been critical for us for some time, an agenda we pursued. But what is interesting at this point in time is that we're starting to get to a critical mass of all of that policy and investment that has got us now 30% renewables here in the UK and growing, and that creates whole new challenges around balancing and flexibility that we need to address. And as we look forward, the focus begins to move to decarbonisation of heat and transport, and that interplays with power generation to create some very interesting challenges. So those are my thoughts. Look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions and to the debate ahead.
Great, thank you very much. So as soon as we can, what I'd like to do is get into a state where we can open this up and get into some really lively Q&A and debate driven by everyone here. Just to sort of get the juices flowing, though, one of the things that sort of emerged for me in the conversation was the sort of, in a sense, commonality about the fact that change is coming and coming fast, massive uncertainty about the nature that change will take, with the proviso that people are now much more confident that costs are coming down, which just reinforces the driver of change. So what does this mean for the business models of the future? I mean, do the incumbents have any legitimacy in such a heavily disrupted world? How on earth do new technologies break through given the highly regulated and kind of quite static nature of many of the market structures that we've got at the moment? So, you know, on both sides of the coin, there seems to be an interesting challenge. I'll be interested in your thoughts on that. So, why don't we start with the incumbents? So, you know, great that you've got balance sheets, great that you've got historical customer lists, but so what? Everything's going to change.
So I would argue that we have not just balance sheets, but we have expertise in energy. So experts in finding route to markets, to optimizing, to balancing, and I think that is going to be increasingly critical as we go forward. So for example, in the past we may have wanted to optimize the dispatch of a large central generation plant, but now it's about aggregating customer demand side response loads, and it's about finding route to market for distributed energy resources. So I think the same expertise can be critical, but if, as an incumbent, if we just stay focused on the old world, we'll wither away, so we have to adapt and change.
I think these uncertainties are very important because the whole world of energy has not a lot of uncertainties. So, and investing on energy assets, it's a long-term vision. When you invest in power plants or in gas infrastructure, it's for 30, 40, 50 years. So now we see that costs are decreasing very fast on new solutions, new business model, new competitors, or new partners. So it changed completely the decision-making for investing in assets. So now it's very hard for us to choose where we have to invest our money because we don't see after 2, 3, or 4, 5 years, really, what these domains will come. And really, we don't know really if the margin we are expecting will be here. But what we know is the global direction. So we see it. So now we are piloting these investments in this business like this. We see that we cannot more investing in coal or in fossil fuel. So we are trying to invest in many different things. So we are trying to mitigate the risks. We are trying to show between big assets and small assets how we can manage these things and how we can deliver smart solutions. But I think, and we think in energy, that we need now to deal with these uncertainties. It's the reality, and we will not pass through 10 years of uncertainty and come back after on a world with zero uncertainties. We think that it will be the next vision of energy. So we have to adapt our organization to this new world.
And for the sort of the up-and-comers then, what does it mean in terms of penetrating this sort of world of energy?
So there's an element of, obviously I would say this, but believe me that this is an agnostic view. Renewables are going to be the incumbent and quicker than we probably think. So because they're a fundamentally different technology, you're moving to a market that's basically designed around a fuel price to a technology that isn't fueled in the same way. All our commercial decisions and all the businesses that have developed around a different kind of technology will have to shift, and indeed they are. And then on the other end, consumers like electric vehicles. They seem to like smart tech, which is like sexy energy efficiency. They're younger, they require different things. That world is changing also. So again, utility companies are having to adapt on the retail side. And so yes, adapt or die. Yes, we'll see more new players, so things like aggregators coming into the sector, perhaps direct peer-to-peer consumer models, all that kind of thing. However, on the side of the incumbents, even under the most radical scenarios for kind of prosumer-led, flexible energy systems, even under those, where everyone has an EV and we're all doing really smart things with DSR, 50% of our future electricity demand in the UK, we reckon will still be met by kind of the big three energy techs, largely offshore wind, nukes, and some flexible gas. So that tells you that we're going, the real question here is how do you make that decentralized world happen, capture the value of it, make sure that we have a functioning market, but also do big infrastructure investment right at the same time.
I want to respond to Emma's point, really, because I find myself swinging very often in this discussion from being hugely optimistic when I come to places like this about how everything's going to be marvelous and how everything's going to change. And then I read another climate report about the likely temperatures that we're going to get to, and I get really, really depressed. And you can look at things that have changed, like the cost of photovoltaics, the price for the offshore wind that Emma referred to, and you can be optimistic. But if you take the fact that 50% of the power is still going to come from those three sources that Emma mentioned, i.e. renewables, energy, and some form of gas, there is still an enormous amount for us to do. So there is a technology challenge, and the new entries will help get us there. But the other point I would like to make, Philip, is I think the regulatory market has to change. One of the areas that we focus a lot on is energy storage, and that doesn't just mean batteries, ladies and gentlemen. It means lots and lots of different energy storage. And I go and talk to a whole load of companies, and they say, well, why do we want to bother? Why do we want to bother with energy storage? All it does is add a cost to us with no additional return. If that's the regulatory market, there is not going to be an encouragement to make sure that every ounce of electricity that's generated when the wind blows is effectively used by you or I as consumers. And the more and more PV that we get, the more wind that we get, if we get tidal power, etc., that just becomes a greater challenge. So there are hurdles to overcome?
So I think that's a really interesting theme to sort of play with a little bit, right? So it's clear that it's clear to me that over the last 6 or so months, suddenly the lights are going on around the fact that perhaps this is technology, and technology change is critically important. I think everyone sort of took real note of what happened with the auction outcome, but system integration and enabling the new business models to emerge is becoming, kind of the challenge du jour. And so from government and from the regulator, Ofgem Bays in July, they put out their Smart Flexible Energy System paper. We've had the Clean Growth Strategy, which makes it, I think, very clear that economic growth and the transition to a clean new economy, energy economy, is absolutely sort of a convergent goal. We've had Dieter Helm talk about his ideas for changing the electricity market, and most recently Laura Sands and Imperial have come out with a very provocative paper around reshaping regulation. So there's a lot in the ether at the moment around this. If you were to name one thing that you think is necessary in order to unleash the potential of all of this innovative horsepower that's sort of queuing up there, what would you say that it is? Does anyone want to go first? One thing.
I'll have a bash. So in all of that, the thing that we most commonly ask for from government is commitment to funding. And that doesn't mean unlimited subsidy, but it does mean having a clear idea about where they want to get to with energy-ish, because we'll all be wrong about the mix to some degree, but then having the right policy instruments in place and the financing behind it that stays consistent. Because what tends to happen with incoming governments is there's a lot of stop and start. You get a kind of 3-year time horizon on funding or financing or regulation, but you're sort of also hedging that against the next government changing things. And some consistency in that world is particularly good. And in particular, within all of that, if I could get the UK to do one thing better, it's that we're cracking at R&D funding for new ideas and grant-based funding, and we're pretty good at procuring stuff at scale, but we're very bad at the bit in the middle. And I don't think that's just the energy sector. I think many of you from other sectors will be saying that today, but the valley of death kind of funding to get brilliant new ideas to market, we are bad at. So fix that.
Any other thoughts? One thing?
To give you from our point of view a very clear and a short vision, it's to shape a stable and regular regulation, for example, with a carbon tax, and with a vision on not 2 years, but 10, 20, 30 years, with a very stable mechanism that can pull all the markets. And after, I think now, I'm talking for NG, but we have plenty partners here. We have the innovation, we have the laboratories, we have the mechanism in order to deliver new technology, in order to implement and continue to decrease the cost of this solution. But now the problem is really when we are investing in the solution, it's not for 2 years. We are trying to continue this, but without any vision, any perspectives of regulation, not only for a small country, but for Europe at minimum, but world if better, it's very hard to invest massively on a solution, because we don't know if in 5 or 10 years we have another president that can change everything about his vision and change completely and change the vision, change the business. So it's very important to have this and try to deliver it not only for one country, but to have with COP21 and the other, we hope to have this kind of system in next year.
My message would be keep it simple and minimize the number of interventions and regulations. Set up a market structure and leave the market to deliver that. So to kind of pick on the storage question, I mean, we're investing in a £30 million storage facility in Cumbria, and it stands on its own 2 feet, but that's because there is a market signal that means we should be investing in it. So I think the signal should be the market needs flexibility, not the market needs energy storage or lithium-ion batteries. So that's what would be my call, is to kind of have a clear market framework that is simple and then keep it stable.
You asked for one thing, and I'm going to pick on what Olivia said. I think we need dreams. One of the most powerful speeches I've heard in the last 18 months was from the mayor of Copenhagen, who talked about the fact that his dream was that by 2025, just think how close that is, by 2025, his ambition is that Copenhagen will be carbon neutral. And he reckons they're on track to do it. My point, you could talk about John F. Kennedy's dream, in 1960, which came true in 1969. I think we've got policy papers, and I completely agree with the point about flexibility that Mark just mentioned, but we also need to have really good, ambitious things. And even if we fall short of them, I don't mind. I think in this world, on this topic, we owe it to our children's children to actually set really big, ambitious goals and be prepared to fail trying.
I'm just so tempted to carry on sort of asking questions and keeping this debate here, but more importantly is to hear whether there are any questions or insights that you want to raise out here that we can debate on the stage. So I think we've got some roving mics. Can I just remind you all, when you're asking your question, just to say who you are and try and keep it to one question and keep it snappy. And there's a gentleman over here in the middle who immediately catches my eye.
Les Borushevich, I'm chairman of Cancer Research UK and former head of the University of Cambridge, but the nature of the question probably relates to my previous role as chair of the Research Advisory Board from DFID. Demography tells us that the biggest demands for energy are going to be in the developing world. You have a problem if you drive through any small Indian town or through a town in Africa, that when you look at the electricity pylons, everyone is pilfering energy from those central systems. At the same time, distributed energy runs a real problem in that local communities cannot afford the capital in order to be able to purchase the asset. If you believe in an equitable system, how do you, as multinational providers, see the fact that if we want to get to a carbon neutral system, we have to be able to provide energy at a reasonable price? And how do we deal with the fact that the losses are actually inherent in the system if you want to sustain social equity in those communities? Where does the industry go to tackle this problem?
Okay, so perhaps Angie could...
I could give a small part of the response because it's a very hard topic. We have a business unit in G Africa that can try to deal with these kind of things. It's really how we can put business model for off-grid solution. It's really this completely new vision of business model without any big network. So it's very small systems that can be delivered to villages, small cities. I think now we are close to entering in the part of in a vision about to duplicate this kind of business model. We have some test pilot everywhere in Africa with solar, with combined solar and biogas, with biomass, plenty of other solutions. Africa is very rich. There is sun everywhere. There is biomass everywhere. There is agriculture. The lesson learned for the last 3 years about this kind of business is there is not really duplicable things. We need to make handmade solution for everywhere with a reasonable price. And it's really the case. What we are trying to do now is to be not only passive, but being active. We bought last week a company dedicated to micro solar systems combined with biogas. It's powering, I think, if I remember well, 100,000 people in Africa. So it's new solution. It's a startup that is trying to deliver the solution. And they have a business model that is running. And they are winning money. And they are delivering energy with very low prices. And it can be duplicated everywhere in Africa. So I don't have a very good response for you, but there is good experiences now in Africa. We have the same now in Asia for small islands because they are paying energy very high costs. for diesel production for electricity. What we are trying to deal with is to deliver more reliable solution, autonomous solution, so they don't need to get fuel from another company with very high price. They are autonomous for systems, more local using of energy sources, sun, but even waste for biogas systems, for example, and with a better availability of the systems. So not only to get 2 hours of electricity per day, but to have 10 hours for light for the night and sufficient electricity for the day, for the day-to-day use. So, and what we are seeing is now we are entering in a way that is very positive. There is plenty of positive experience. There still have work to do because it's not perfect, but I'm very optimistic about that. And I think in the next 5 years, we will completely be able to duplicate this kind of system everywhere.
I'm going to put my old job hat on briefly. So I was the director of the climate change program for WWF International and was part of the team working on the Paris Agreement. So brilliant moments in my career sitting in the room when that gavel went down. But the deal, as always with the UN climate negotiations, nearly fell apart on this division between energy access and the need to decarbonise, because at that point, the cheapest forms of energy available were still largely, you know, if you're in India and someone's telling you that you're not allowed to burn coal, and you're looking at the need to develop the economy, it smacks of a new kind of colonialism, or at least being very unfair. But that's one of the brilliant things about the falling costs of renewables and the opportunity that offers for non-large utility-led, non-large infrastructure-led ways of delivering energy cheaply to communities. And it's a generalization I hear often, but it works here, which is to say that in the developing world, actually, they have an opportunity to do it right and get the costs right because they don't have an existing centralized grid infrastructure. And most of my time at the moment, when we're talking about, renewables are expensive or they're difficult to do, what we're actually talking about is our grid infrastructure makes them more expensive and our existing market makes that more complicated. I went on the trade delegation to India with Greg Clark, the Secretary of State, and the change in conversation in 12 months has been remarkable. And the Indian government and the Chinese government just go, what's the cheapest kit I can stick on the end of whatever size grid? Oh, great, it's this stuff. We'll design our energy system around it. And so on the point about optimism, I left that job at WWF, which I loved, and moved back to the market because actually the market is moving so quickly. It is the real source of optimism, that and an international climate change agreement that every country in the world, apart from Trump's America, has now signed up to. So
a profoundly optimistic response
I'm a
to what I thought was actually quite a challenging
walking
question.
optimism bias. But,
But both from a company perspective and from what you've seen from your sort of overview things. That's really heartening. Any other questions? Gentleman here.
Good morning. Martin Bellamy from SolarPank. The end solution, or what is the end goal, would be energy services for everyone. Now, I would suspect that requires a change in language to go from talking about peak capacity and generation to the services that enables for people. And when you connect this with the developing world, putting a solar panel on someone's house with an energy efficient TV, the energy consumption is almost negligible. How do we get from the system we're in at the moment about paying for energy to talk about the value of services, particularly quality services?
Great question, and it's become very clear to us that almost no one outside of the geeky world of energy really understands what a kilowatt hour is, and yet that's how the sector talks to its customers. From I think Centrica's perspective would be interesting on this.
Yeah, so I completely agree. We do need to think of this challenge in the terms of what are the services that our customers want. So ultimately, people want heat, light, and the energy to power their devices. And it doesn't matter where that sits. The generation can be within the customer's home or the industrial customer's premises, or it can be supplied from somewhere else. And as I said earlier, the market can kind of work out what the right way to do that is. But I do agree with your point that if we have that mindset of how do we meet the needs of the customer rather than how do we generate kilowatts and have peak demand coverage, we'll get a more efficient solution.
I don't really agree with the question, if I'm honest, because I want to relate it to the previous question. I think it makes sense in this country. I think if you go to a poor developing place in Africa and say, what services do you want? They'll just say, give me some electricity, or give me water, clean water, or make sure there's enough food, which you can relate to energy as well. So I think to all intents and purposes, the question makes sense in a developed world. It may even make sense in a developing world. I'm not sure it makes sense in the third world, where you've got to recognize that they are not yet in a position of having enough of the basics of life.
Three compliments for your question and make the link with the last question, the off-grid solution and situation. Give a good example about this, because people don't want to pay for the kilowatts, they want to pay for the service. And the company need to deliver a guarantee of service for production, transmission, and commercialization. So it changed completely the business model, and it gave us a very good example about what we can deal with this kind of global services for energy without any problem of counting. It's how many people can pay for price for this service in a village for 1 year of services, delivering heat, power, gas, for mobility or any other. So it's a completely a new vision, a new business model, where the companies like NG or others need to control technology, need to control the service, need to control the maintenance of the systems, and sometimes it can be a challenge for countries like in Africa. Sometimes not a lot of business or not a lot of people to do maintenance. So it's really a new business model. But I'm like Emma, very optimistic, because we see plenty of very good experience about that. Some of them are not profitable, some of them are very expensive, but some of them are very positive. And it's very amazing when we go there and see what benefits for the people we can deliver. It's amazing. So sometimes we are trying not to lose money, but every time we are doing good things, and we think it's very possible. And we think that in Europe, for decentralized districts or for small city, it's not quite the same situation, but it will be close too, because we are delivering a service for cities with specific items, specific needs. We'll talk about Amsterdam, about completely decarbonized. It will be the same, because we will deliver locally a service. After, in Europe, we need to completely review the systems for metering and for commercialized energy. It's not the same problem.
Thank you. I mean, I think this question of how an industry that has developed over a century around being profoundly utility-driven transfers itself to becoming a service industry is a really, really profound question. But for another time, perhaps, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to see if we can squeeze in one last question. And gosh, this is going to be ib-dib thrupney bit. The gentleman with the poppy and the grey jacket there.
Good morning. My name's Chris Moore. I work with Gordon in the Energy Research Accelerator. I would like to ask each member of the panel, what is the one low-carbon energy technology that you think the UK could swing behind? And I don't just mean from a cheap pound per megawatt hour perspective. I mean from companies exhibiting here today can generate IP, can generate jobs, and one that can really contribute to the development of enhanced productivity in the UK.
Anyone want to go first?
This is going to get me into like 900 kinds of difficulty with my members. Thank you. The reason our prices are so low for wind in the UK is both technology, but actually more importantly, the existing supply chain and expertise that we had here, and wind speeds and marine resource. So we have port infrastructure, we have energy engineers from working on in the North Sea, we've got great R&D at universities, we've got coastal infrastructure, and that has meant that we are the world leader in offshore wind and should look to stay there by going for things like floating offshore. But in a similar way, we also have an opportunity with wave and tidal technology. Now, I am personally agnostic about that for domestic energy use, a generation up to about 2030, because we've got loads of cheap other kinds of renewable here. But if you talk to Taiwan or South Korea or Australia or any other market in the world where they don't have a really flat seabed and really high wind speeds, then they're very interested in what we have, and I think we'll lose that industry which has been built up here to another country. So we've got great wind speeds, we've got great marine infrastructure, we should utilise it. That's why we should do it here.
Great. And to save everyone else from needing to equivocate quite as much as you were forced to by that difficult question, I'm going to say you've got a right to plead the fifth on the basis that it's inappropriate to pick winners, it's too early to tell in many cases. And I'm also going to ask you to just name the technology in one word. Plead the fifth or name the technology. That's
Carbon capture and storage. I know that's not one word, but that's what you're getting.
Cecilia, thank you.
I will have 3 words: green gas technology. Really, we think that in UK it's a gas country. 40% of the primary energy mix coming from gas. And I think that biogas injected into the grid that can be storable.
More than one word.
Yeah.
Thank you, we've got it.
With hydrogen,
green
can
gas,
be very positive.
wonderful.
Green gas.
And Mark?
I'd say smart and digital.
Smart digital. There we are. Thank you very much. Please, will you join me in thanking our panelists in the traditional way?
So thank you again to our panel. For those of you who didn't get a chance to ask a question, I saw a lot of hands up. What we'll be doing throughout Innovate is after these on-stage debate sessions, we'll be going, the speakers themselves, along with some of our experts, will be going over to the Innovate UK stand, where you can go and meet those experts, have a discussion, carry on a debate, tell them what your dreams and hopes are, what your favourite technology is, perhaps. Harsh Prasad, right at the front of the stage here, will be here from Innovate UK. He's our energy expert, and he'll be on the stand now, and he can tell you about the kind of support we have, including maybe filling in Emma's funding gap issues. So please do go over to Innovate stand if you want to pick on those speakers a little bit more and then get a chance to ask your questions. And that'll happen through every session throughout Innovate. Back on the main stage now, our next session is on the new era in space. We'll be looking at how new discoveries, intelligent devices, and rekindled dreams are once again making space exciting. To lead that debate, I'm delighted to welcome Stuart Martin, the Chief Executive of Satellite Applications Catapult. Stuart joined the Catapult in January 2013 from Logica, which is now part of CGI, where he was the business director for space and satellite communications for nearly 7 years. He was leading all the company's activities in the space domain. Stuart is a former vice chair of UK Space, which is the British Trade Association representing the space industry, and a council member of Eurospace, which is its European equivalent. Stuart, the stage is yours. Thank you.
And good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce you to this panel session on the new era in space, which I think is a really good title for what I hope will be a very interesting and stimulating discussion. I think space, there is no doubt, is going through a really exciting time right now. As someone who's worked in the industry now for getting close to 30 years, I've never known a time like it when there's been so much going on and so much talk about the potential of the sector. And I think that's really coming from two quite distinct but very much interrelated areas. And one is the actual space sector itself, the investment that's going into putting in new infrastructure into space, building on 60 years of investment from government and the public sector, and now the commercial entrepreneurs, some of the big names in tech, you know, the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos, they're now thinking about how they can invest in the space sector. But also, I think, perhaps even more importantly and of more relevance to some of you, It's the relationship of that space technology to a number of the other emerging technologies that are coming around, the artificial intelligence, the autonomous systems, the robotics, which is creating an environment where we can start to generate the real value from using space technology here on the ground. So I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion, and I hope you take a lot from it too. So I think we've got a very interesting and diverse panel looking at this particular subject matter from a number of different ranges. And so I'm going to invite our panelists to come up here on stage and join me right now. So first of all, we have Mark Boggett, the CEO of Seraphim Capital, founder of the world's first dedicated venture fund looking at the space sector. So welcome, Mark. Secondly, we have James Hines from Airbus Systems, who's the Vice President for Strategy, Development and Space Systems. Thank you, James. And following James, we have Charlotte Bishop, who's the EO Technical Business Development Lead for Terabotics. That's a startup business coming from Imperial College, who we work very closely with. And Dr. Jason Muruthanarden, who is a business broker for the European Space Agency. So thank you very much to all our panelists. And I don't mind if you wouldn't mind joining me and welcoming them to the stage. So I'm going to begin by asking each of you to set the scene a little bit, just talk a little bit about your organisation and what you are seeing from the space industry right now, why it's important to you. So I'll start at the far end with Mark.
So hi there, everybody. Pleased to be here today. So as Stuart mentioned, I run Seraphim Space, which is the world's only venture fund thematically focused on space. So as we were looking to launch this fund, we said to ourselves, well, if we're going to be the only fund that's focused in this area, how can we be the best? And in order to do that, we approached a range of space corporates and spoke to their CEOs and senior team, told them what we were looking to do about investing into companies that were looking to disrupt this sector. And a number of those companies agreed to invest into the fund and support our activities. So big companies like Airbus, SES, Telespazio, Teledyne, Surrey Satellites, are all investors in the fund, and we can draw upon them for due diligence and support. We also count the European Space Agency as our partner. They've got 20+ incubators across Europe that are working with early stage, exciting technology businesses that we're looking to subsequently fund. And we also introduced a new member to the team. So myself and the team had been investing in relevant technologies for our career: computer vision, artificial intelligence, sensor technology, new materials. But we wanted to bring somebody into our Seraphim team that had experience in Earth observation, which is one of our core areas of focus. So we brought on board a guy called Michael Jones, whose the claim to fame is that he created a company called Keyhole Corporation, and that was acquired by Google, and that technology then became what is now known as Google Earth, and he served as the CTO there for 10 years. So we're a £70 million UK-focused fund, and we invest in the A series. So this is the round after seed. And in order to be able to address some of the 100 to 200 companies that approach us globally each month, we also co-founded another organisation that I'm involved with called the UK Space Tech Angels, and they invest into seed stage deals that are with businesses in the space tech sector.
Thank you, Mark. James?
So good morning to all, and I'm glad that you could join what I think is going to be the best panel of the day, so I'm glad that you're here for that. So just as a very quick intro to myself, I've been in the space business now for 30 years, started work in Portsmouth, and it's at least my home at the moment, but I travel around the Airbus organisation. I really want to bring up 3 points which I want us to think about. The first is really capturing the scope of what Airbus Defence and Space does in terms of the big space industry, but then to really bring out the points of how we are experiencing transformation, and transformation in many regards. And then perhaps at the very end, and we can invite some questions on this topic, is, okay, we're in a period of dynamic change. What do we do now? So I'll bring up a few thoughts, but I would really appreciate some interaction from the audience.
So first point is really giving you a snapshot of the Airbus vision. What is it that is important to us as we move out to really embrace the space industry? And it's a bit of a silly statement. Space is, of course, very big. We believe that the three pillars of our industry where we are trying to engage and have engaged is first in the area of connectivity. So we have satellite communication. I could bore you with tech detail and say M2M, 5G, IoT, but I would prefer to actually leave you with a simple statement under the banner of connectivity, which is connecting any device, not just a person, but any device, anywhere, anytime. That's our vision. And it's a vision which isn't going to only involve satellite, it's going to be key, but it's working satellite and terrestrial together. It's working HAPS, where Airbus is a lead in terms of the Cepha platform, but also LEO platforms and GEO platforms. All of them will be working together. So we believe that connectivity will be a key element where space can really shape the future. The next is discovery, and it's excellent to be sitting next to Charlotte, who will probably tell you a lot about what she's enabling in terms of Earth observation. But discovery for us is all about resolution, persistence of coverage, making sure that we have data not only to big institutions, but also to each and every one of us. The last pillar, which is many people believe it's a really exciting bit of the industry, but I think all of them are exciting, is exploration. So in Stevenage, we have a significant project looking at the Mars rover. We have a Mars yard. We have a STEM center, which has been opened recently to really embrace exploration. We talk about the moon, we talk about Mars, we talk about various missions which are actually going to go and explore. But also, we have modules such as the Orion European Service Module, which is going to go up with the US SLS to actually really push the barriers. And it's not purely about exploration for exploration's sake. It's about seeing how we can use resources in space. Is there something else out there which goes beyond what we found out with the International Space Station? So in short, connectivity, discovery, and exploration. In terms of that second element I want to bring up quickly, it's transformation. And if we look at our industry, in terms of satellites, we've jumped from telecommunications from 20 satellites a year to constellations. Airbus is building the OneWeb that's 900 spacecraft over 2 years, albeit smaller, but it's meant that we've had to change our paradigm of how we engage with supply chain, industry design concepts, and end applications. The other element, of course, is things like SpaceX. And if you look at SpaceX and what Elon Musk has done, it has really challenged the launch vehicle industry. And we're responding with the Ariane 6 and looking at what more we can do. Also, in terms of more infrastructure in space, means that we will need to be looking at regulation. We'll need to look at on-orbit servicing and how we can make that a reality. So just to wrap up from my side, so what? You know, we are in a time of transformation, dynamic change. What should we be doing together? I'll leave you 3 points, and I would be really welcome to discuss. The first is innovation. It's what we're here to really explore and discuss together. But innovation in the broadest of sense, not just tech, but also looking at what can we do in terms of the industrial flow, financial modeling, and it's really good, and financial in terms of actually providing capital. And it's great to be sitting next to Mark on a panel again. The second is partnership. Partnership in terms of working not only in the supply chain, design practice, but also with education. How can we actually fuel this real fight and real desire to innovate in the UK and keep going on with the great heritage we've established? And last but by no means least, we really need to engage in that financing model. There's a lot of great opportunities which have been exercised and been come to fruition because the barriers to entry into space are coming down. And people like Mark and other funds are going to be key in addition to our own organisation and institutions such as ESA, which Jason represents, of making that reality. So with that, I thank you for your attention and pass over to Charlotte.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. It's fantastic to be invited here today to represent the tech startup side of the panel and less on the technology side of my colleagues around me. So aside from my Terrabotics hat, I also sit as the chairman of the Geological Remote Sensing Group, which is a Geological Society special interest group. So we're kind of at the forefront of the changes in the industry, not just from space, but as James mentioned as well, in terms of how we can bring in lots of different types of information from other space sources, as well as aerial, ground, drone, those types of features. From a Terabotics perspective, Terabotics was set up in 2014 as a tech startup based in London, and really came out of some innovative research that was being undertaken by our founder at Imperial College. So within that Earth Science group, developing some algorithms for signal processing of satellite data, you kind of stumbled upon a way to process data in a rapid and accurate way that's not we haven't seen in the industry in terms of the commercial off-the-shelf systems available. So really it was set up with the focus of scaling that, and particularly in this new era of space where we have so much data to work with, it becomes very cumbersome to deal with the traditional methods, traditional processing strategies we may have looked at in the past. So how do we process that in an efficient way without sacrificing the accuracy or some of those other trade-offs that we might have done previously? Our focus particularly is on oil and gas and mining sectors, but we also work within natural resources as a whole, and also starting to look into commodities. Some of these new sectors are very exciting for new space, and I'm sure that will come up in our discussions this morning. But there's so much information that's out there, it really becomes a problem that we've seen in the past of the disjoint between the technology developers as well as the end users, and how we can close that gap between the two and actually provide meaningful information, that actionable intelligence, the kind of key phrase you may have heard a number of times, to actually bring something to those users, perhaps the traditional as well as the non-traditional users of the information, but who can still see value even if they don't necessarily know or need to know that it came from a space-based source. So it's a very exciting time to be in space. It's great to be part of a new startup, one that myself, I only joined within the last 6 months, having a background of the last 10 years in a more established heritage-based satellite data provider and value-added service provider. It's a completely new way of facing the challenge that we have now in terms of encompassing and using all of this data, but there's a lot more of a kind of two-way discussion that's now happening in the industry to make the most of what we have now. So looking forward to the discussion, and I pass it back to you, Stuart.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Charlotte. So Jason, we've heard from an investor, we've heard from sort of a large established space prime, we've heard from a startup, a data service provider, and I think Charlotte asked the question, how do we close the gap between the technology and the users, which I think is a great question. And I guess from an institutional perspective, which you're representing, that's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think one thing worth noting is that, ESA's been around for quite a while, since the mid-70s. And ESA has a very large legacy of research and development and technology. But, relatively recently, we have also been looking at business applications. And the program that I'm part of, which is called Business, which has been rebranded as Business Applications, actually is phase 2 of a program where we have a relatively large pot. We could say we are essentially a venture arm, where we are working with VCs like Seraphim to co-invest in companies. So Mark actually mentioned the business incubation. Everybody knows the technological aspects of the European Space Agency, but there are actually 2 business arms. And so this is really quite exciting for us, because the first business arm is the incubation arm, and the second business arm really is business applications. And what we see here in business applications is that we are literally investing in companies from post-seed to pre-Series A. And the idea being is that ESA in some way is actually facilitating companies and exciting companies to grow, where we are trying to create an ecosystem here where space essentially is the stickiness in the service provision. And once we've helped them grow from, let's say, seed all the way to pre-Series A, we have really good companies where we can actually pass on to VCs such as Seraphim, and also we can actually support companies such as Charlotte's company as well, to help them grow through the life cycle of their companies to help them move to the next stage. So for us, business applications really from space is really quite interesting. It's very, very exciting at the moment. And it's not just receiving Earth observation data. We're seeing applications related to telecoms, to satellite navigation, to weather, even to the things that even health, to the things that we developed for the astronauts. And on top of that, we see terrestrial technologies such as drones. We see things like artificial intelligence, robotics, enabling the space technologies as well. And that's where we see the exciting innovations happening.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jason. What I want to do now is I'm going to ask each of our panelists one very quick question, which just sort of teases out a little bit more on some of the things you mentioned in your opening comments, and then I'm going to throw open to the floor, because I'm sure you've all got lots of questions. So Mark, I mean, I've been in my position now at the Catapult for 5 years, and one of the big problems that I found when I started out was there was no private capital entering into the space sector at all, none. And that was a huge impediment to the startup ecosystem we were trying to stimulate. So how has that shifted so far in 5 years? What's changed, and why are people like you and your colleagues now interested in space?
Sure. Well, let me just take a little bit of a step back beyond that 5 years, actually, just to set the scene, because this is an industry that has only recently become of interest to venture capitalists. So here are some numbers that I'm going to quote from a Bryce startup report, which I would encourage you all to take a look at. So in the 5 years from 2000 to 2005, venture capitalists invested 186 million in total globally in the space sector. The next 5 years, there was a total of 373 million invested. So that was up to 2010. From 2011 to 2015, your 5-year period, just about, that figure jumped up to 2.3 billion. Then in 2016 alone, that figure was 2.8 billion. And then we also track, as Seraphim, we do an index that monitors all of the global activity. And our index shows that up to the 30th of September, the most up-to-date information that we have, that there was 3.2 billion invested in a 12-month period. So there's a massive amount of venture capital investment that's come in the last 5 years, which is accelerating sharply. And the question is why? Well, there are 3 drivers from our perspective. The first is the changes in the hardware market. So developments in the smartphone industry have produced components that are robust, miniaturized, and are low cost. And they've been finding their way into the space industry. The hardware industry is moving towards software-defined everything, and that's really affecting the hardware industry. And then you've got 3D printing as well. So a combination of these hardware elements are really significantly driving down the cost of space. So satellites can now be produced at a fraction of the cost of their previous cost, which opens the market to a broader playing field. Then the next driver is launch. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the news around SpaceX and the great things that they're doing with reusable rockets in order to drive down the cost of accessing space. There's a whole range of other players in this market. And there's a race on at the moment between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos with his Blue Origin company to really drive down the cost and create a reusable rocket launch, which is going to drive down the cost by an order of magnitude over the next handful of years. And then the final driver is a really important one, and this is about the lowering the cost of storage and CPU. So cloud storage, cloud CPU has made accessing supercomputer power and storage affordable. And what this has brought forward is how you can effectively use artificial intelligence and machine learning to crunch massive amounts of data. So that's really only just become affordable, and this is the reason why AI is really growing now. So a combination of all of those 3 things, those 3 drivers happening at the same time, is the reason why there are now hundreds of new companies that are being created in this sector, all of them looking for finance, and the venture capitalists around the world recognizing very significant opportunities to invest into these businesses.
Very good. Thanks, Mark. So James, I mean, Mark's just created this picture of all these hundreds of new companies who are entering in the space sector, all supported by private finance. You know, as a long-established prime working, you know, on government-funded science missions and sort of the large commercial spacecraft in geostationary orbit, how do you see the future?
Okay, thanks for that, Stuart. Thanks, Mark. I think Mark has only just kind of like given you one element there, in as much as he said a fraction of the cost. One of the things we also see within Airbus is that people want not just the performance they had yesterday, but they want more performance and they want it tomorrow. So, you know, as a supplier of hardware and significant elements of software, we are seeing all of those pressures. So, to answer the very specific question of how it's changed the way we engage, if you look at our traditional market, which has been institutional, large geostationary, scientific exploration spacecraft, we've really had that whole product line shaken up, still keeping that line, but also looking at what it means to engage with large constellations. OneWeb, as I brought up earlier, is an example of that. What does that mean in terms of interfacing with the ever-increasing population of space launch vehicles? So we mentioned SpaceX, but there are other opportunities out there. And I know that we have an international panel going on. PSLV, which is one of the launch vehicles coming out of India, is one of the ones which we actually work with as well. So the whole launch industry has been shaken up. And I think the last element, which we feel is going to become ever more important, is that as the amount of infrastructure increases in space, in terms of constellations, in terms of LEO, MEO, or GEO, is the need for us to be good citizens not only of our world, but also of space. And that means topics such as regulation of access, of course. It means interference issues, but also having the ability to clean space. So we think they are all transformational drivers which we have to engage with.
I think we might come back to, if we get time, a little bit about that issue of, you know, the managing the space environment. So Charlotte, I mean, your business is at the other end of the scale, so you're very much focused on the applications and what do we do with the information that we get from space to create value here on the ground. I mean, perhaps, can you say a little bit about how important you see some of the enabling technologies, things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, how you're using that, and perhaps also where you see some of the market opportunities, what sectors are open for these sorts of products and services?
Sure, yes. I mean, I think what we've seen at Terabotics in terms of kind of automating our processing algorithms, not just for some of the more traditional products that we make, which are more high-resolution terrain models that are kind of rapidly produced, high accurate, you know, again, kind of fulfilling that need of people want that information immediately. You know, they don't want to wait 3 weeks as they may have had to in the past. They want that data in their hand or that information as soon as possible. But really, the driver from our side to push forward on the automation, the machine learning, the AI, is really because there's so much data now that actually it's impossible for kind of from a human point of view to process all of that data in the same way that we've done in the past. You know, we hear this term big data bandied around a lot. Big data is not a new concept. You know, the first Landsat image was big data at the time because it was something new that challenged the technology that we had. What we have now is just such a vast amount of data. So it's still big data, just as, you know, in a different kind of context. But really the value of machine learning and AI comes into automating processes, scaling those processes and being able to repeat those on a basis that we now see is much more important to the various industries that might use them. You know, before we didn't have the luxury of having high repeat satellites. You know, maybe an acquisition was only possible once every couple of weeks or once a month. With now over, I think it's over 75,000, 75 commercial satellite missions. And that's without counting the constellations within that. Then, of course, there's now such a vast amount of data. We can get data daily over most sites of the world, albeit there is some cloud cover issues to also address. And we've seen over time as data access policies have changed in terms of open data, and European Space Agency has changed their policy, but also the US and other areas as well. Once that data became free, the usability, the access to those sources increased exponentially. From the USGS perspective, I read recently that when they opened their data back in 2007, 2008, from going to several tens of thousands of downloads per year, it rocketed to 25 million by 2014. Yeah, it's a vast amount of data that people then need to ingest and process into something useful. So if we just, a lot of universities have been doing this for some time, and that's where we can really learn from some of these, the computer vision, machine learning, robotics type of research, rather than perhaps on some of the more traditional-based technologies. And to answer, I guess, your second part, in terms of applications, there are always the traditional application or market sectors that we work in, the oil and gas, mining, engineering, environment, and we have a lot of baseline knowledge in those sectors through the careers that we've had at the Terabotics team over the years. However, though it's still been a very disjointed use of that data, even though it's been around, EO has been used for the last 40 odd years. But what we're now seeing, as Mark and James have also alluded to, is that there are new markets, and this is exciting. It's an exciting time to start to see how this data can be used in new markets and commodities data. And Jason and I were talking earlier, how do, people don't understand really the information that they could get from space that could support them in a business that naturally those things don't align. But yeah, it's filling that void between the kind of downstream side and the upstream that's been very technology focused traditionally, and actually building something useful that's designed for that end user, or those groups of users.
Very good, thank you, Charlotte. I think, give a very clear sense of the breadth of opportunity that's out there if we can find the right products and services. So Jason, ESA, the European Space Agency, is an organisation whose history is very much embedded in the science and the technology of space, and the move into the applications and the business support is a relatively new thing. So why is that now so important for ESA to play a role in that area?
I think one of the main drivers really is the type of space company and the access to space. In the new space sector, you have, you've got the mega constellations that are coming up. Okay, you've got the, let's say, the so-called non-traditional space companies that are making nanosats and actually driving down the cost of data. I think the key here is accessibility to space. I think it's got to a stage and a level of maturity where literally anybody can start a let's say a company that is utilizing space for their service provision in some way. And so now that opens up, it's really exciting because it suddenly opens the use of space to drive a business or to help drive a business beyond the traditional space companies. It's beyond hardware now, it's beyond upstream, it's beyond the downstream of the downstream definition as well. And it's really exciting because what we want to do now is to be part of that program. And then plus we can't forget the technological legacy that the agency has as well. And so the key here is that we want to come in, we want to help educate certainly the non-space companies to actually tell them, okay, what is it that space is actually capable of doing? It's not just the satellites, but it's also the other stuff. It's the Earth observation, it's the communications, it's the weather data, it's the stuff we develop for the astronauts. And a classic example is an exciting time for us where we've actually entered the fintech sector. So we've actually reached out into the fintech area, and we're actually seeing fintech companies actually proposing service provisions where space is being used to enable that provision. They didn't necessarily realize that they were using space or that actually a space asset was of any particular use to them. But again, we come in with our technological and R&D legacy. We will help and we'll come and we'll educate. And this is where we're seeing the real innovation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jason. If it wasn't so dark out there, I'm sure I would have seen eyebrows raising when you mentioned the fintech sector. Yeah. It's not the first thing that people might think of when people are talking space, but it does, again, it shows the sort of the breadth and the real broad range of industries that can be affected by space and satellite applications. So, yeah. Thank you. So we've heard a lot from our panel on the sort of the scene setting now, but so I'd like to open up to our audience for any questions you might have. Is there, so there's a question right here at the front.
My name is James Morton, and I used to manage one of the very early pioneers of Earth observation, Hunting Technical Services, when we used to work on Landsat images at $6,000 per image by eyeball. And in the end, we had to leave that business because Earth observation, we could never make money out of it. And the price of the data just kept on coming down and down. The price of the cost of computing power came down and down and down. And I would like to ask, this is about the Earth observation side of space, whether you've not now got to a situation where the data is such a cheap commodity and the barriers to entry are so low, and the uses are not immediately obvious, mass consumption of all that data that would give you money. How do you see that working out?
So, perhaps take a first go at that one. From our perspective, one of the interesting things about this new data is as it moves closer towards being available real time, it has significantly more value. So from satellites passing the same spot in Earth from once a day or once a week down to every 2 minutes, we believe that that opens up the relevance of the data to a much, much broader landscape of verticals. And really where we are finding opportunity to invest is where we've got individuals like Charlotte coming out of specific verticals where they recognize that there is a need for using this kind of data. They understand the industry, the specific vertical. I mean, one of our big verticals is insurance, as an example. It's not an industry that uses significant amounts of satellite data at the moment, but it's an industry that's about assets and monitoring assets. So there are very significant opportunities in many verticals. We believe that that is growing by the day as the data becomes closer towards real time.
Charlotte, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from, to kind of come back to your kind of early point about data costs and how the price coming down, actually, we see that as a real benefit to what we're doing, because the more data we can ingest, the more information that we can extract from it. And for a lot of the machine learning and AI work that we do, you need a lot of training data. These algorithms don't just learn autonomously, which is probably a good thing. But what it does mean is that we need to take in as much data and as much different data so that the algorithm isn't just set on one particular source that we become reliant on, and if there is then a problem with the continuity of that mission or that data, then we've got no redundancy. To come to your question in terms of making money from it as well, I think it comes down to really understanding the sector and also the users and how they might use it, and perhaps less on the, not just on the traditional side, the traditional exploration side, say in oil and gas, but looking at the downstream applications in that downstream rather than our space downstream in terms of the monitoring, the remediation, the other kind of elements where space can play a part, and actually work with the users to see the benefit of that data. I think we're at a really exciting time to be able to do that much more readily than perhaps we were before.
And I think, on an agency's perspective, I think the fact that the cost of data has become so low, in some instances free, has been absolutely amazing for us. We've seen lots of companies and startups out there utilizing the data, not just Charlotte's company, but very similar ones. But I think one thing worth noting also is that Earth observation is only part of the technological enabler for that service provision. And so we're seeing a lot of coupling with other types of technologies, not just AI, but also with weather data, with all sorts of other things. I think the role of, or the appetite for cartography I think in general, B2B and B2C applications have certainly grown exponentially thanks to applications such as Google Maps and Earth engines and things like that. And so we're seeing lots and lots of those applications coming through. And the other thing that's also that we're seeing also is that technologies such as drones, okay, are also expanding the capability of space assets. Certainly are being it's very complementary to Earth observation data. And so we're seeing lots of pairing up, and we're going to keep seeing that as there are more and more applications where people are actually cherry picking a bit of AI with a bit of robotics, with a bit of drone, with a bit of Earth observation data and weather and so forth. So we're going to see a lot of that. And with that will come let's say, the revenue generation side, the money-making side of it.
I can make a quick point. I do want to make sure we get some other questions in.
Yeah, so. It's a very quick point, but as a manufacturer and also as an operator, we think the market has evolved. You know, you're now not only looking at the resolution of the image going down to 0.2, 0.3, you're also looking at persistence, making sure that you have that frequent revisit, and also that you have indeed, as Charlotte has mentioned, I think several of them, actionable intelligence. So you're not just providing an image which can be eyeballed, you're actually providing intelligence now. So we've seen the market evolve quite significantly, and we're seeing a lot of interest in terms of the industry response on all of those various segments.
Thank you. That was a good point, so thank you for that. So any more questions? So we've got one in the middle over there.
Hello, Ryan Laird, Space Engineers. Just wondering how the UK space industry is actually linking with non-space and to make use of all this data. I mean, how actively are you linking with other non-space industries?
Well, Jason, do you want to take that one? Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that we're doing is we actually have a Kickstarter program, which is basically a deep down and dirty program where it's very themed. We go out, we actively target non-space sectors such as fintech. We've had IoT, all sorts of other areas as well, and we'll go out there and we'll actually say, look, you know, if here's a bit of an educational piece as to what space assets are and what their capabilities are. You know, whether you realize you're using it or not, okay, come and talk to us, and maybe we can do something together in terms of a grant funding play.
Does anybody else want to? I mean, I'll perhaps make a quick response to that question as well from the point of view of the catapult. I mean, Charlotte asked the question or made the point right at the start. One of our big challenges is to bridge the gap between the technology providers and the end users. And a big part of that, the reason the gap exists is that the end users don't understand what is possible and don't understand quite how relevant space technology could be for their business. So that's something that we spend a lot of time doing on the catapult, working in the transport sector, in the health sector, in all sorts of different areas, just trying to educate and help people be better informed so that when they're thinking of solutions to problems they've got, then they know that satellites is one of the tools they've got in their toolkit that they can take advantage of. So there's a lot of that sort of activity that we all collectively participate in.
Yeah, and I would echo that. You know, it's really important. We do a lot of education activities at ESA, and that's also going to the other digital events and digital forums as well. So, you know, we have presences at Web Summit this week. You know, we're going to the Slush event in Helsinki and other places and other events across Europe as well. So we're really trying to give the impression and also just say, look, you know, space can be a stickiness in your service provision, and you know, and we facilitate the educational piece.
Okay, very good. Does anybody else want to say anything else on that final point? I think probably we don't have enough time for any more questions right now. So what I'll try and do is just summarise what I think has been quite an interesting discussion, a well-informed discussion. And I hope those of you who are not from the space sector now are getting a better sense of exactly what the space sector is all about and why it's so important here in the UK. But we heard from an investor who explained what's changed in the sector and now why we are seeing such a proliferation of startups and new businesses in space. And that's certainly our experience in the catapult. There's no doubt the environment is very different now to what it was when we started out 5 years ago. We've heard from an industrial prime in the space sector who's got a very long heritage building large spacecraft for majorly institutional customers and also for satellite communications companies. And I think what they see is an exciting future, looking at the way that that we manage our environment in space is going to need to change in order to accommodate the proliferation of new industries and new business that's going on there. Looking at the way that we manage debris, we manage the space environment, the way that we manage our launcher systems and the opportunity to create a different way of launching, and also perhaps for manufacturing satellites in orbit in the future, which I think is a very exciting new opportunity. Charlotte's come from the downstream world. In a startup environment, looking at the sort of the broad range of opportunities in new markets that are now starting to understand the role that space can play, and some of those have looked in the past, and perhaps at that point space technology was too early, but now with all the artificial intelligence and the other tools that we've got, the high-speed data, the high-speed communications, the cloud services, it's starting to become possible to actually extract the value and deliver cost-effective solutions to big problems using space technology. And also, we've heard from Jason and the European Space Agency how the focus from the institutional side is now shifting much more from the science and the technology is still very important, but we're now focusing on the business support and the applications too, and the benefits to the broader economy. So I think with that summary, I shall close, and perhaps you just join me in thanking our panelists one final time for their contribution this morning. So thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you, Stuart. Thank you, panel. As a reminder, all the way through today, whenever there's one of these debate sessions on the main stage, afterwards you can go to the Innovate UK stand and carry on that debate with those speakers and with the experts that we have within Innovate UK. Just very quickly before we move to lunch, we've got one more little treat for you before you go, and explore the Innovation Showcase. Particularly don't miss the 360-degree immersive igloo theatre, showing a video around the future we're all creating. Please go and see the Support Zone, Hello World, and particularly the Women in Innovation exhibition that Ruth McKernan mentioned this morning. But today we're launching some videos highlighting the winners of our Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund Robotics and Artificial Intelligence in Extreme Environments Challenge. To lead us into this break, our first is going to be played now. It's on reducing the hazards of Arctic ice to shipping by Thurn Group.
People are very aware that the Arctic ice is receding, and the summer ice is about half the extent it used to be about 20 years ago. What people are less aware of is the thickness of the ice is also reducing, and again that's about half the thickness it used to be. So there's a quarter of the ice in the Arctic in the summer that there used to be 20 years ago. We're looking at the hazards of Arctic ice to shipping and infrastructure up in the high Arctic in the far north. We're going to be taking robot submarines, which are called autonomous underwater vehicles, and we're going to be putting them under the ice and using them to look up at the bottom of the ice and see what hazard that ice might pose to infrastructure and pipelines and ships around the Arctic. There are a couple of examples of where this service would be useful. One might be ice piling up on the side of an oil rig, and that's a big safety issue. So you can't send a person under that rubble, it's too dangerous. So sending an autonomous underwater vehicle to study it and gauge what the danger is helps you deal with it. Another example is the opening of new shipping routes. For example, the Northwest Passage will shorten shipping routes, which will save oil, speed up delivery times to the UK. And that shipping route will be threatened by icebergs. If we can make sure that shipping route is open for longer by understanding what the ice threats are, you'll use less fuel supplying the goods to the UK economy and help the global climate. Thurn Group is going to be working with Cambridge Polar Consultants. Thurn Group provides operational expertise and systems expertise, while Cambridge Polar Consultants provides the research base and the knowledge about the ice that is needed to make this a success.